Dr. Cate Shanahan, there she is on Instagram, you guys. Go check her out. And you're not real active on there. You post stuff from time to time. Are you most active there or Facebook or where?
Facebook and Twitter, mostly. Yeah.
On Twitter, like that's become such a, oh my gosh.
I know it is. It seems like there's two wildly polarly opposite mindsets. One is a large group of people who are like all in about the vegetable oil thing with me, right? And they're super geeky about it, which is nice, very nice. And then there's the other people that are making Twitter have a bad rap.
Other people is an
Yeah.
I still am on Twitter only because everything I do on Instagram, I can just shuttle it over to Twitter. What it does, it's got a little thing where you can click a button and it automatically posts it to Twitter. So I don't really engage specifically on just Twitter, but I do check in every once in a while to see who's calling me fat again and all these other lovely things that happen on Twitter.
Right. Yeah, I need to grow up and get better at Instagram like all the cool kids.
Yeah, and you've got almost 10K, so it's not like you're doing chump change. Let's help her get to 10,000. Get a cool feature, Cate, when you hit 10,000 on Instagram. On your stories, it gives you the swipe up ability. So if you have a link to a video, like this is going to be a video on YouTube for my podcast and everything, if you post it, if you got 10,000 followers, it lets you have that swipe up ability for your followers. So it's pretty cool.
Okay. All right, cool. Now I have to figure out what that means. But I'll do my research. I'll ask Luke.
You for over a decade now, and you are so brilliant. Like you have a book that to this day, people still write me, have you heard of this Cate Shanahan? She's amazing. She has this book, Deep Nutrition. I'm like, I remember when Deep Nutrition was a self-published book. So yes, I'm well aware of Cate Shanahan. Long time, and you know your stuff, but yeah, don't feel bad. A lot of doctors don't really know what they're doing on social media, and they're like, oh. But that's okay. That's why you have people like me that bring you on our shows, and we can expose your work, and you get out there that way.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Deep Nutrition was your book many moons ago, and of course, it's still very relevant. You were way ahead of time when it came to talking about vegetable oils. You were way ahead of time on a lot of things. I remember I got to moderate a panel that you were on. You and Dr. Ron Rosedale were on the side of no starches, and then Paul Jaminet and Chris Kresser were on the side of starches when there was this whole safe starch debate within the community. Where was that? Ancestral Health Symposium? Something like that?
I think it was, yeah, like 2011 or something like that. Yeah, ancient history.
12, yeah. So it's amazing all these years later, what happened to that concept? Like, you don't hear anybody talking about starches being safe anymore. Now, I knew what they meant at the time, but it was just a disastrous kind of way of talking about starch when we know the mechanism of that's not good for your body in any way.
Yeah, the closest, I guess, that you could approximate a way to differentiate between like starches that you really should kind of cut out and starches that aren't going to do you that much bad is I touch on it actually in my latest book, The Fatburn Fix. And I call them slow. Thank you. Perfect. That's it. Avocado. I love that avocado dot there. Yeah, I call them slow carbohydrates because they're slow digesting. And so they don't bump your insulin. And I'm actually, when you do the continuous glucose monitors, you can see it play out in real time what's happening when you eat a sprouted grain bread, sandwich, or one slice sandwich really, versus regular whole grain bread, like even the supposedly healthy stuff, right? Like, what is that? Dave's Killer Bread, that kind of stuff. That's what people like now. And it just doesn't bump anybody's blood sugar nearly as much. And so for those people who are more metabolically damaged, which is actually, the category of people I wanted to talk about with you today, Jimmy, because they're the reason I wrote the second book, is the folks that are, my age and older, 15 up, and sometimes younger, But the more metabolically damaged you are, the harder it is for you to get through this like keto flu or low carb flu phase. And a lot of folks don't make it. And so I was dealing in my practice, I was dealing with the people who like fell out, right? Who are like, well, I guess it's not for me, right? And they give up on the whole concept. And I'm like, well, wait. What's going on is totally different. And it's not that you need carbohydrates in your diet forever. It's that right now you're so efficient at putting calories in storage that you put your fat calories in storage so quickly, and then your body's resistant to burning your fat again because of insulin resistance. And your high insulin levels keep it in the fat closet. So you feel like, you didn't eat 300 calories or 400, whatever, for breakfast because you're hungry 2 hours later. So it takes, like, people have to build their meal. Some people, right? Not everybody's like this, but some people have to build their meals more carefully. And so I just wanted to open it up to the where you don't have to have, like, be full on keto all the time, and you can actually get a lot of benefits by doing other things, right? So, like, I wanted to talk about, like, do you really need to be keto do you need to have ketones in your bloodstream to get the benefit of a keto diet? And do you need to be on a keto diet to get the benefit of burning your body fat? And that's really where I'm at, like, with my practice is I realized once I started diving into why people were overweight, right? Like with deep nutrition, I was talking about more from my experience where I had an immune system problem and I had connective tissue problems, and I wanted to help people who had all these other problems. Basically, everybody except for the people who just had weight problems. I could help people with diabetes if they were also overweight. I could fix their diabetes real quick. But I didn't really have study and focus on weight and what was going on there. And when I started diving into that, Jimmy, I realized that there was a lot going on with people's hunger that no one was talking about or really diving into and understanding where that was coming from, like this whole hangry thing, right? That, I think you made that word about 1,000 times more popular than would have been otherwise. But because, like, you gave people a solution for it. But what's going on when you're hangry isn't, we laugh about it and stuff, but it's not a laughing matter, because why should you feel bad when it's just been a few hours since you last ate and you have plenty of body fat and you're not, like, literally in a starvation state? Why should you feel bad? Why should you feel this kind of hunger that takes over your mind and your body in a lot of ways? And so that's what I dove into with the fat burn fix.
So let's formally introduce the book. I was getting there, but as a good author, and I see you've got them in the background, so move to the side and I can see that. But there it is, the Fat Burn Fix. This is your brand new book, Boost Energy, End Hunger, and Lose Weight by Using Body Fat for Fuel. Just came out, you guys. Go check it out wherever books are sold. But it's been a long gap between deep nutrition and the Fat Burn Fix. What 10, 12 years?
Well, the first version of deep nutrition was 2008, and right. And then the second was 2017. So, right. And I thought I was just gonna be able to get right down to the fat burn fix, like, afterwards, because I thought I had it all figured out, and then I realized, oh my God, I so don't have it all figured out. There's so much more to it.
Where were the gaps?
So, like, what I didn't recognize was what causes diabetes, actually. I mean, that was like a mind-blowing thing where, like, what I thought I was going to write mostly about was the benefits of being a sugar burner. I'm sorry, scratch that, reverse it. The benefits of being a fat burner versus a sugar burner, and really focusing on the sugar and not having sugar in your body. And, kind of secondarily or equally important is eating the healthy fats that we all talk about with the whole LCHF keto and everything. But the more I got into it, there was one research article that just blew my mind. And I included it in the book. And what it showed was what happens when mitochondria burn the 4 different kinds of fatty acids that there were in the test. There was the saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and then 2 kinds of PUFAs, which were the omega-6s and the omega-3s. And mitochondria are the energy generators of our cells. Every single cell, with like the exception of red blood cells, has mitochondria and depends on mitochondria to create all their energy, or the vast majority of their energy. And if you zapped out your mitochondria, your cells would start dying in a matter of seconds, because we need a constant energy supply. But what this experiment showed was that within minutes of giving a intact whole cell that had mitochondria in it, it was like a liver cell, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, within minutes, the ATP production just started plummeting.
Whoa.
Like to less than half of what it was in the case of the omega-6, and even worse in the case of the omega-3, which we all see, think are like, we can't have too much of that. Omega-3, that's anti-inflammatory. What happened with that is it plummeted to like 20% of baseline. So the omega-6 plummeted it to 50% of baseline. Saturated fat kept it at baseline, and monounsaturated fat, like from olive oil and stuff, actually bumped it up another 10-15%. So there's clearly a preference that our mitochondria, that our cells have for fuels. And then I just started like diving into like, that was so fascinating, because it said 2 crazy things. One, why would monounsaturated fat be better than saturated? And 2, holy cow, omega-3 and omega-6 are so bad for our cells that like, just do the thought experiment. What would happen if your body fat was too high in these 2 types of fat, either one of these 2 types of fat, right? So because our diets are primarily a lot more omega-6 than omega-3, we don't really have too much omega-3 in our body fat, but we have way too much omega-6. We've got like, it builds up in our bodies. The whole reason that the Tufts people and the Harvard experts that still promote vegetable oils, if you can believe it, in this day and age, get away with it, is because they are essential. We need them, and they have all this, right? We need them in our bodies.
They get away with it, Cate, because those vegetable oils do one thing on the cholesterol panel specifically, like a champ. They lower LDL. They do.
Totally.
And so that gives them the perception that there's a benefit happening to your cardiovascular health, when we know behind the scenes it ain't.
Totally. Yes. I mean, it's what we're dealing with, what we are living in. We are living in like remember the movie, The Truman Show? You remember that with Jim Carrey? And like, it was all like this beautiful, idyllic little village that he lived in. And then things started like glitching out a little bit. And he started wondering, what is my reality here? Am I like missing something? And eventually, like, he started poking at the reality, and every turn to try to escape that reality, that artificial world, there was an answer. Like, he wanted to see if he could venture out of it. Right. So but no, they said swimming is dangerous, and, you don't want to go near the water. But then he's like, well, I can get a boat, and then it's hard to get boats. Right. And then there's a horrible storm, and it's just like, there's an answer for everything. And that's the same exact analogy as what keeps us in this wrong mindset of nutrition, where doctors are taught fat makes you fat, cholesterol clogs your arteries, salt, etc. The myths that we're all familiar with. But there's so much structure built to keep us living in that fantasy world. But anyway, so getting back to the omega-3 versus the omega-6, right? So our body fats, because we are all eating an average of 100 pounds per year of seed oils now, an average of 100 pounds per year, several, ounces per day.
Somebody's having 200, because I'm not eating any.
That's right. That's the average. That's exactly right. So, I mean, that's the kid. I remember that news report of some 12-year-old who ate pretty much nothing but KFC, greasy chicken, and went blind. Did you see that one?
No.
Yeah. He went blind because he wasn't getting enough nutrition, and he just basically went blind because of it. So that's how bad, these seed oils are for us. But so that those people are out there making up for the minority of us who are totally avoiding it. But anyway, so 100 pounds per year. The amount in when they do biopsies, this is another like mind-blowing study that I found. And I was like, wait a second, I have to rethink everything I was going to talk about with the fat burn fix. I found a series of studies that showed how much PUFA was in body fat over the past 100 years, the change, right? So there was one from the early 19 teens that showed it was like about 2%, 2 to 4%, depending on which person was studied. And then in the 50s and 60s, it had gone up to like 9 to 12%. And then in the early 2000s, it had gone up to like 20 to 25%. And there's studies now that show as high as 30%, right? And if our body fat is designed to have 1 to 2% of something, and we have 30 times more than what it's, yeah. And these are unstable fatty acids. They're unstable. They oxidize easily, and that means they promote inflammation. So we have highly inflammatory body fat. That's insulin resistance. That's the problem, right? So it kind of turned my whole thought process about insulin resistance from carb-centric to PUFA-centric.
So you got my head spinning now, as I always love talking to you, Cate. So let's just go with the 30% number, and let's say people with significant insulin resistance, and let's say it manifests as stored body fat. Not everybody with insulin resistance gets stored body fat. They're so-called TOFI, thin outside, fat inside. But let's assume somebody has adipose tissue. It's mostly in the center of their body. They got a belly, basically, and it's filled with all those PUFAs. What's the countermeasure besides just not eating PUFAs anymore? You got enough for the rest of your life in there. How do you bring that level down without at the same time feeling bad as those fat stores are being released?
That's the question. That's the bazillion-dollar question. And so what I've found is that there's of course there's a way to do it. The body's amazingly resilient. The good, there's a happy ending here, right? The day that you decide to stop eating seed oils is the day that you start turning your metabolism around. And what I've found is that it's a combination of healthy fats and the slow digesting carbohydrates, because I found that for some people, when with the fat burn fix, I guess I should clarify that I before I let anybody start the plan, or before I encourage anybody to start losing weight or start my plan, I want them to take a fat burn test, right? A quiz, and they get a score between 0 and 100. And if it's below 50, they're in a pretty fragile state, and they may not feel so great if they go full on keto, but that's okay, because you can still, cut out most of your carbohydrates and, cut it down to like maybe 50 to 70 grams a day, and build your breakfast with a little bit of the slower digesting carbohydrates, and of course the healthy fats, and a combination. So even slower digesting carbohydrates are easy to come by, because they're in like all nuts and seeds, right? I don't want too much of the seeds, because those tends to be high in PUFA, but nuts and peanut butter and almonds and macadamia nut butter, and cashew butter, and actually just plain old nuts, those are fantastic sources of slow digesting carbohydrates.
As long as they're not roasted in seed oils. This is the caveat.
Thank you. Yes. And you do have to start looking. And so like that's really like the most important thing really for your health, is to start looking and understand how these things have gotten in your body. So you could have like a breakfast smoothie with like, I do like yogurt. I recommend to people like whole milk plain yogurt and some peanut butter or cashew butter, and like a little sprinkles of unsweetened coconut flakes, or some of the very lightly sweetened cacao nibs.
Yeah.
So just like a tiny little bit of carbs, right? So, but not much, like no more than 15 in the morning. The worst time of day to have your carbs is in the morning because we're slightly insulin resistant in the morning because we've got more cortisol, and cortisol and insulin are like yin and yang, and they're battling each other for control. So breakfast is the worst time of day to eat that, oatmeal and waffles and
They have a bagel with cream cheese. They have orange juice. They have all the healthy foods in the morning. And wow.
exactly. And half the time it's not even real cream cheese, right? Because a lot of folks that I've worked with don't know that cream cheese is supposed to be made out of cream because they weren't born in this country, and so all these foods are new and they've just succumbed to all the marketing. So it's PUFA in your cream cheese, even though you think cream cheese is a healthy fat. But
Eyes are opening up. All these little sneaky ways the food companies have slipped in PUFAs, omega-6 fats into your diet. Maybe you're like, I don't eat vegetable oils because you don't cook with that Wesson or whatever kind of vegetable oil. It ain't just there. It's everywhere.
yeah, it's truly everywhere. And a lot of folks said the message doesn't get through just because they think, oh, okay, so it's like trans fat, and somehow like people start thinking of it, well, it's like trans fat, but it's different than trans fat. It's what they make trans fat out of. It's the starting material for trans fat. But I've spoken with really intelligent people who are like, well, I don't sit down to boxes of Oreos, so I'm sure I'm not eating this stuff. And then they kind of like, that's it, right? But you do have to kind of question your reality once you start looking, because you realize it's in everything. So the back to the crazy story of why it took me so long to get this book done. And like how it really, it's really for those metabolically fragile people who try so hard to do a keto diet or jump into intermittent fasting, and they lose weight. Don't get me wrong, they are successful, but it's kind of painful. It's like an unending low carb flu for a lot of these folks. And, because a lot of the younger folks, 20, 30, 40 something, relatively healthy people, they can just, if they have a low carb flu, they get through it in a few days.
So one of the things with like the so-called keto flu, low carb flu, a lot of people say, well, that's just electrolytes. Maybe they boost their salt a bit, boost their potassium, magnesium, hydrate more because you're dumping glycogen stores, da, 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 da. Is that not the issue for these people you're referring to?
Correct. Right. It's not the main issue. Right. So for them, the main issue is just, they're just not well enough that they can only burn their body fat, because it promotes cellular inflammation, which is, the other side of not producing energy. Right. So remember that experiment that I brought up? So it was when they added the omega-6 and the omega-3, it not only shut down ATP production, but the mitochondria actually, they literally kind of blow a fuse or a relief valve so that they don't kill themselves with all the inflammation. Wow. So there's energy being released, but it's not producing ATP. It's producing inflammation and heat, literally.
Wow.
So I don't know if you've ever run into people who are like, yeah, I do any kind of activity and I just get hot, right? So that people feel really bad when they exercise. Did you used to be that way? Are you still that way?
I can be that way somewhat, and I tend to be a little more hot-natured, and I still have adipose tissue in the belly. So you're speaking my language here.
So yeah, I mean, one of the tests, you can actually get a test and see what your fatty acid contains. It's kind of a blend of your fatty acid and what your last meal. You get a whole profile. It's probably like $400, depending where you go. But you get every single fatty acid, like a profile. It's not just the red blood cell test where they do the omega-3 versus the omega-6. It's every little from the short chain carbon 8 to the carbon like 24s. But yeah, so that can actually tell you where you're at in terms of recovery, short of getting an adipose biopsy. But So, with those two things in mind, what I did was I came to understand that diabetes starts out very often as hypoglycemia symptoms that people ignore. And so before you've gained a pound, before, a pound over your ideal body weight or whatever you are at your healthy weight, um, you have folks who are destined to develop insulin resistance and prediabetes and diabetes type 2, of course. They very often develop hypoglycemia symptoms, by which I mean that's the hangry, right? When you're hungry.
Is it reactive to the food or a combination of reactive hypoglycemia with hypoglycemia?
It's not reactive.
Oh,
Right? Because we're not talking about somebody who's producing too much insulin. We're talking about somebody who needs more sugar than what's available in their bloodstream because their cells are little sugar addicts. They are metabolically dependent on sugar. And this is the fascinating thing about what type 2 diabetes it really is. At least this is my theory on it. So what happens is your brain's very smart. It recognizes that when your blood sugar level is in the normal range, the normal set point, which is say like 80, it's really a range of like, it accepts, between 65 and like 100 or something like that. When it's really within that normal set point range, your brain realizes I often don't have enough energy myself, thus causing the hypoglycemia symptoms, right? Anxiety, can't concentrate, brain fog, anger. Those are all energy deficit in the brain that is causing that. And so that energy deficit is a result of the fact that the brain is sugar dependent and you've just sucked out your blood enough because you can't use your body fat, right? That when a cell is trying to burn body fat, from time to time, the concentration of PUFA delivered will make the mitochondria basically blow that little fuse and it will stop producing energy. So the cell has to get more energy from somewhere or it will die. And what other fuel is available to it 100% of the time? Blood sugar. We don't always have significant amounts of fat in our bloodstream, but we always have sugar. It's a teeny tiny little bit, right? A total of like a teaspoon or 4 grams, 16 calories. So there's going to be areas in the brain that just don't get enough from time to time. And a way of adapting, the brain is very smart. The brain says, well, I can make the liver pump out more sugar. So I'm going to go ahead and do that by way of the vagus nerve. There's a direct line between the hypothalamus and the brain to Mr. Liver in the gut. And it says, go ahead and give me more sugar. I don't care what you got to do. I don't care if you're breaking down glycogen, if you have any, or you're converting your muscle into, protein into sugar by gluconeogenesis. I don't care what you got to do. Just get the blood sugar up. So that's why I a long time ago had noticed that the first thing that people who were on their way to developing diabetes had was a fasting blood sugar that was higher than it was the rest of the day for them. Significantly higher in the morning. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it would be like 93. And then in the afternoon, it would be down in the 70s.
Right.
Because
dawn phenomenon that people worry about. I know Dr. Adam Nally talks about it, kind of a physiologic insulin resistance in the morning because of the cortisol, but some of these other pathways that you're talking about here too, that people worry about it being higher in the morning, but it's your body smart enough to know, hey, I'm going to need that glucose for various things. And then later in the day, it's used all those things up and it's at a much more normal level.
Yes, exactly. And so it's a very slight differentiation. But like if you are not an avid exerciser, generally your blood sugar is going to be pretty much the same all day long. And this is what I've seen from doing a bunch of continuous glucose devices on different people, right, with different like exercise. So the folks who are really the avid exercisers, they do have a more pronounced dawn phenomena. And their problem isn't insulin resistance. Their problem is just that they're, well, usually men, honestly, who just burn more sugar, and it's totally fine. It's not a sign of a problem. It's not always a sign of a problem that your blood sugar is high in the morning, higher, significantly higher.
So it gives those athletes a little more wiggle room to maybe have a few more carbohydrates than someone who's sedentary.
Totally. exactly. Yes. And so anyway, so when we're developing diabetes, our liver, our brain is telling our liver to raise blood sugar. And at some point, it goes up from being okay with a blood sugar range of, 65 to 80. It has to ratchet up just a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And finally, once it gets up over 100, it can reach the threshold where a doctor might say, oh, I think you're pre-diabetic. But the reality is, for a long time, that person has been metabolically disturbed, right? We know that insulin resistance develops a long time before prediabetes. But I'm saying that these hypoglycemia symptoms that people experience are not to be ignored. And they're certainly not to be treated with more carb, right? But that's what drives snacking. That also drives a lot of my patients who were actually following low carb diets, but they're carrying around these low carb snacks, right? That actually were like nuts that had a little bit of carb in them, and so, and protein, which they were unfortunately probably converting into sugar. So, so that's where I started to notice that, to feel like there really needed to be another solution, because these were people who felt like they couldn't stop snacking. And in fact, it was hard to even get some folks to realize that they were snacking. And that's why in the Fatburn fix, I know.
They weren't, like they didn't have consciousness that they were putting food in their mouth?
It's really bizarre. It's almost like night eating, but I would literally see people in my office carrying around like a Starbucks coffee that was flavored. Yeah. And saying, I haven't had anything to eat today, right? Part of it is the liquid thing, but then there was another person that was always, sucking on cough drops, and she had a bag with her, and she had the bag literally on the table, and her hand had just gone into it, and she just popped one in her mouth and was sucking on it when she said she doesn't snack. That's a snack. But the reason that it's part of the reason that it doesn't register as a snack is because we think of some people think of snacks as extra. And if you're having something and it makes you feel physically better,
right,
you think you need it, right?
Or you think something that is 0 calorie or very low calorie doesn't count either.
Correct. Right. If it's less than like 5 calories, how could it count? Right. Which cough drops have some, I don't know how much they have, but it's like 10 or not much, but it's enough, because remember, your bloodstream only carries like 16 calories of sugar at any given time. So you just give it a little extra help. And if that's all you need, then it makes you feel better. But so there was so much more going on than I had realized before I started looking into what is happening when our body fat, when our diets are full of PUFA, then our body fat becomes full of PUFA. What is happening between meals that drives these hypoglycemia and this crazy out of control hunger that people are like, that takes people out of the willpower zone, right? If you are literally not able to concentrate, and that having a French fry or some kind of snack on your drive home before you have to make dinner for people, your family, is going to make you feel better, there's really no amount of willpower in the world that's going to last long enough for you to lose weight. And so in the Fatburn Fix, I talk about, let's get your energy up and your hunger down before we focus on weight loss.
How do you do that?
That's what it's easy. It's what we just talked about. We just have you do the healthy fats in every meal to sustain your energy. Have a little bit of healthy fat.
Is it just the olive oil because it gives you that boost, or do you include olive oil and other monounsaturated fats, avocado oil, along with butter and coconut oil?
Everything with fat, everything you just mentioned. Yep. Okay. So, and then of course, like, bacon, which has some healthy fats in it, and a lot of our breakfast meats, sausages.
Some people poo-poo on bacon and sausage because, it's got omega-6 in it. I remember when I was in the paleo world with you, they would always, the omega-6 that's found in pork. And I'm going, is it that much? Is it like vegetable oil omega-6? No.
Right. It's first of all, it has some antioxidants in there, but it's a lot of monounsaturated fat in
Right.
there. I mean, compared to vegetable oil. And I like to meet people where they are and make life easy.
And is where people are. So
Yeah, exactly. If bacon seems like, oh my God, I get to eat bacon, that makes you happy, following a healthier diet, fantastic. Add some bacon to your eggs, right? And add some bacon to whatever your other, we have other sources of more monounsaturated and saturated fats. But so yeah, so that's it. So that and the slow digesting carbohydrates, which are like the whole foods that have some carbohydrates in them. And I even do like I was happily surprised that when a couple of my patients sort of ran the experiment on their own metabolisms of the slow carb sprouted grain bread versus other whole grain breads, that you saw the predictable spike with the whole grain because it's still high glycemic, but with a slow digesting carbohydrate from basically the intact grain that is now really the main structure, that just like a nut has all this interwoven fiber and protein and a little bit of fat that kind of slows down the breakdown of that sprouted grain bread in your digestive system. So, a couple people have run that experiment, and we saw a little bit of a bump at, maybe like these are diabetics, remember? So to see a bump of like 10 to 20 points versus, 80 or 100 points, that's a win. I'll take that.
so is there a commercial brand of that kind of bread? Are we talking about like Ezekiel bread? What are we talking about?
We are talking about Ezekiel bread, and there's also other sprouted grain breads that have uh, additives to them that don't work the same way. So there's a grocery store here called Aldi's, which sells similar products to Trader Joe's, and their sprouted grain bread failed that continuous glucometer experiment. Yeah. Hmm.
So it is Ezekiel bread because I throw that into my diet every once in a while, just kind of testing things when I'm wearing a CGM. And I don't really get this huge spike like I would from other sources of carbohydrate. I'm trying to see how my metabolic flexibility has changed over the years. So inadvertently, I'm doing what you're wanting your patients. So yay, now I'm going to be more deliberate about it. So that's cool.
Yeah, great. Well, that's great. So that's why I wanted to. So the difference between the fat burn fix and like all other keto books out there is that I kind of ease people into it and I help them understand where their metabolism is, and so that they know that you can definitely get away with cutting out a lot of carbs and get all those benefits of the massive drop in insulin. Um, but you don't have to be zero carb. And that's really important for so many people who, just want life to be a little familiar.
So one of the more popular trends right now, though, Cate, is the carnivore diet, which is basically zero carbs. So are the patients that you're referring to here that are having trouble with this hypoglycemia and are having those energy downtimes and they're not feeling well, even eating keto, they definitely should not do carnivore?
I definitely, because what happens, and we didn't talk about this yet, but the other thing that happens is that you become really good at converting protein into sugar, and I think that's something that doesn't get talked about very often in the low carb world. If you don't have enough fat, that's why it's so important if you're going to do carnivore and you are metabolically damaged, all that protein you're eating is just going to get turned into fat in the end because by way of sugar. Meanwhile, it stresses out your kidneys because they have to take the nitrogen off. That's the difference between a protein made out of amino acids, and that can cause gout flares.
Okay, I'm going to throw an experiment I did recently at you because I threw this at Ted Naiman, who's the protein guy, recently on a show, and he didn't have an answer, but you probably do. So I did this experiment where I'm wearing a CGM and I have a pound of just chicken breast, no fat added, no carbohydrate, just a pound of chicken breast. And I take baseline reading, it was like 83. which would be typical. Then I might have been 82. Then I ate the pound of chicken, and I was like, okay, I'm full. Wonderful. So 15-minute intervals for the next 2 hours, I was going to see what the curve would be. And so after 15 minutes, it went up to like 84. After 30 minutes, it was up to 87 or so, 86, 87. But then at 45 minutes, I was starving. I was getting weak. I could feel myself getting lightheaded. My blood sugar dropped into the 70s. So it dropped a good 10 plus points from, it kept dropping every 15 minutes for the next hour. I'm over here on this couch just going, oh, please, this has to end soon. Meanwhile, I'm getting hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. Finally, at 2 hours, I still was not back to baseline. I'm like, I have to keep going to see when it comes back up. Another 30 minutes later, it did come back up, but that was major reactive hypoglycemia that happened just eating protein, which I'm assuming it's because of this mechanism you're talking about with some of these patients. But I have theorized that there might be something involved with glucagon that could be preventing that from coming back up. Is there any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That's a really good thought that, yeah, so that the protein maybe perhaps suppresses glucagon, or, if just there's a little lag in your system, or there was so much of an insulin response there because protein it's not the same as, white flour. It's something like 1/5 of white flour, but that's pretty big because white flour is pretty big in terms of its ability to spike.
Well, I can tell you from a previous experiment that I did with insulin, doing the same experiment, I went from about 11 insulin to 1 hour postprandial 22 insulin. So it does, and I know that chicken specifically is a more insulinogenic protein than, say, beef would be. I don't know if it's because of the fat that's in the beef or even the leaner cuts is still fattier than a chicken breast would be.
I think chicken breast is relatively, like, if you're going to say like a glycemic index for meats, like, which based on like how fast it breaks down, it's softer, so it would break down quicker than beef. Beef is, going to be harder to digest, and I think that's reflected in the fact that a lot of people say that they don't do well with beef and they need chicken. Well, it's because they don't have their pancreas doesn't produce enough of the enzymes to break up the globs of protein that are tighter with beef.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you dig into this and you look at people, and you've known me for a long time. I've gotten to a certain point in my health, and my health markers are wonderful. You look at trigs, you look at HDL, you look at HSCRP, you look at like all the key markers that you would say that person is healthy or they got a lot of work to do. And for the most part, the numbers are pretty healthy. A1C 4.9. I mean, it's like all these really good numbers, but it's still got adipose tissue right there in the belly. And so I love that you've written this fat burn fix to help people like me. I'm 48, by the way. So when I was reading, oh yeah, when you're 50 or older, I'm like, I'm close enough.
Right. Yeah. So, a lot of folks have asked, well, how long does it take to get these seed oils out of your body? And so it's based on, my answer is based on some like studies of radioactive body fat that were done around the nuclear bomb experiments in the Colorado area. And it looked like the half-life is about, 18 months. So that means if you're a normal weight person, half of your body fat gets replaced in 18 months. And if, there takes 3 half-lives, right, for close to 100% of it. And then perhaps there's more if there's more time needed if you have more weight. No one's really run that experiment about the exchange, but it might be longer, so it might stick around longer, right? So there might just be some old stuff left over.
Well, how long that stuff has accumulated. For some people it's just a few years, kids in their 20s, but then others, they're in their 50s, 60s, and it's been decades upon decades of PUFA just building up to the point that your cells are pretty much all omega-6. And doesn't recognize, when you start eating better, it can't be quick. It can't possibly turn around fast. So it's just like even just people generally trying to lose weight. Oh, am I going to be down in weight within a week? I'm like, give it a while. Don't try to rush the process. It didn't take you 1 week to gain it all, so don't expect all of it to be gone in 1 week.
Seriously. Yeah. So I just wanted to bring up like the insidiousness of these hypoglycemia symptoms and how they make people who are, normal weight and overweight feel. So one of the consequences is you get dizziness, or you get headaches, you get migraines, right? So a lot of people who have recurring vertigo or recurring headaches experience these things as their blood sugar is dropping. And so I know this also due to the CGMs. But, a lot of folks who are normal weight don't realize that the headaches that they have, or the anxiety attacks that they have, or the other weird symptoms could be related to their metabolism, because they look in the mirror and they think everything's fine.
Well, and here's the thing. You go see your mainstream doctor, which you are one. You are a medical doctor. When people go to see their primary care physician, oh, well, you got a headache here. Here's a headache medicine. Oh, you got anxiety. Here's some Paxil. Here's some, they give them medications, and it's not addressing the root cause.
Right. And that's back to the Truman Show, right? Like there's all these ways to keep you from realizing what's really causing the problem. We've got these seemingly easy solutions, right? Heartburn pills is another super common solution that the medical system has for the problems caused by the seed oils and the PUFA. Most people, here's another little interesting tidbit that I've noticed, right? Most people with heartburn, they start out where it's intermittent. It's not every day. Oh, I overeat. Oh, I went out to eat. Yeah, of course. What did you eat when you went out to eat? Fried food, right? That's going to make you feel kind of bad. So they take these over-the-counter heartburn pills in advance in preparation so they can, have a good time and enjoy themselves. When you need it intermittently, you have heartburn. When you need it daily, almost 100% of the time, you have fatty liver disease.
Wow. And I know we have like 90% of the population has low stomach acid. What effect do the PUFAs have on that?
They promote inflammation. So everything that the stomach needs to do, it can't do as well. And that definitely includes produce acid, right? It just can't measure the pH properly, because inflammation just is this cellular static that gets in the way of everything that the cell is trying to do. And there's another study I ran into just yesterday that says that the PUFAs distort your gut flora. So all of these studies on at the conclusion of that particular study said every single study that we've done on the microbiome and obesity and so on, we may have our cause and effect wrong. It may not be that the microbiome bugs are making you obese. It may be that your diet, the same diet that makes you tired and not want to exercise and hungry all the time, is changing your gut flora. That's what they said. They're the researchers.
Well, and I love that research. I'm going to have to find that study. But then even like we refer to the gut health as the second brain, the microbiome as the second brain, directly impacting your actual brain. And that, again, is directly related to the PUFAs, the inflammation, the gut health, the brain health, the total health. I mean, it's like when you start putting these pieces together, Cate, it's kind of like, oh, my gosh, why did I not see this more clearly before? And I'm hoping today everybody watching this you're just kind of having a lot of aha moments here that maybe they're finally understanding where they didn't understand before.
When I was on Bill Maher a couple of weeks ago, and Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO's HBO show. Super politically incorrect dude. Lots of people hate him, but he's very savvy about the nutrition realities, right? He's like, yeah, there's no money made in actually keeping people healthy, right? He said that. And I was like, yay, let's say it on national TV. That's awesome. So after that show, I had 1,000 people on my website every day, which is a lot more than normal. And like since, probably 1 million people visited. And and I forget where I was going with this, but what we were, I thought, what were we talking about just before with, people not realizing? Yes, so many people said in the comments and emails and every which way of connecting with me said, this feels like a missing piece because I've tried so many diets. You know, a lot of his audience is in California where they're doing like the lean and clean business, you know, fat, of course, anti-fat in general. You know, there's a lot of influence from the Seventh-day Adventists out there. A lot of Bill Maher fans are vegans and vegetarians and very plant strong, but no one had ever talked to them about vegetable oils, and it made a lot of sense to so many people that I feel like it's just not, even though I've been talking about it ad nauseum almost for, hopefully not too much nauseum, for, you know, over 10 years, there's just a massive, you know, audience of folks who are receptive to this information. Not everybody's receptive.
Well, think of it this way, Kate. You and I have been out here a long time talking about the carbohydrate connection. And now we're seeing, because of the popularity of keto that's happened the last few years, people are generally accepting, okay, I probably should cut my sugar and my carbs in my diet. So yeah. Look at that evolution from the time, like I started in 2005. You've been around forever. About the message. And look at it now. It's mainstream. So you talking about the vegetable oils, which again, that was happening in the paleo world. They never took that and ran with it, though. They kind of like, oh yeah, vegetable oil is bad, and they moved on.
Right.
And never really told people why they were bad. In my book, Cholesterol Clarity, I talked about the twin villains in your health being carbohydrate and vegetable oils, because they were the ones that were basically impacting your inflammation levels the most. And if you could get inflammation levels down, you could end chronic disease. But it never, like, nobody's ever taken the baton and ran with it. So, which is why I'm loving that you kind of put it the focus of your new book, so that people understand these are just as bad as carbohydrates, the bad carbohydrates we've been talking about for years.
Yes, absolutely. And they're harder for people to get their head wrapped around because they sound good. Vegetable oils seem like good things.
Yeah, it's a hard name. They're not vegetable oils. They're oils, but they got this health halo because, oh, they're vegetable oils.
Right. And even
oils, they'd be even better.
Right, exactly right. And even like seed oils, like seeds are like these hopeful things. So I call them the hateful eight.
Hateful. So them hateful eight.
So we got soy, sunflower, safflower, corn, canola, cottonseed, and then grapeseed and rice bran, which are mostly in restaurants.
So where is canola / rapeseed oil?
Oh, didn't I say corn, canola, cottonseed? I meant it's one of the three.
Okay.
One of the three C's.
That was
canola / rapeseed, exactly.
I tell people often that canola oil is so healthy. I'm like, go on YouTube. How canola oil is made with all the bleachers and deodorizers and disinfectants and detoxify. Oh my God, it's like a horrible process. And you look at it, and then out comes this little liquid at the end that they squirt in the plastic bottles that have all kinds of horrible chemicals in them. And so, yeah, it's.
And in Canada, they actually test the canola oil bottles, and they show that there's trans fat in there, and that's just one kind of the mutated molecules that forms during the processing of this stuff. That probably as much as 5% of it is just utter toxicity in the bottle before you cook it, and then when you cook it, it magnifies.
Right. Yeah, I'm amazed. You can walk into any grocery store in America right now, and there's shelf upon shelf upon shelf upon shelf of these seed oils, the toxic 8, as you call them. But the good news is we're starting to see more olive oil, more avocado oil. I'm seeing coconut oil. I even saw macadamia nut oil in my local. So they're adding ones, but it's just a little bitty section, and then this massive, because it's cheap, easy to make, highly profitable. Like, how do we break that? Because people rely on these because of the cost, because it's got the American Heart Association's heart health symbol on there. How do you get people in their minds to stop looking at it as a good thing and see it as toxic?
I think we have to help people realize that they are being lied to for profit. So 3 weeks after I was on the Bill Maher show, he had another person on talking about metabolic health and vis-a-vis the coronavirus, right? Because I was saying that if you take away seed oils 5 years ago, you don't have anybody under the age of 65 in the intensive care unit or dying from the coronavirus, because it's the inflammation that's killing the young people, right? Not the weakened immune system from age or, fragility or infancy. But so then the next person on, he hadn't had anybody on to talk about health, nutrition in like years. And 3 weeks after I'm on, Tufts sends somebody out from their independent school of nutrition, who graduated from Harvard. He's a cardiologist, so he's got the credentials. He's like Mr. Fact, right? He just breathes truth according to the standard hallowed halls of conventional thought, right? And he talked about how, yeah, we really do have a metabolic problem. We just need to eat less and exercise more, of course, right? Like the same old standard party line. So I went onto the website and to look at what exactly are they promoting seed oils, because he didn't mention a thing about what I said, which is that these are the cause of, this is what's killing people, that this is why this pandemic is scary. And he didn't mention a thing. So of course, on the website, he says he's got like a nutritional infographic, and he says that there's things we need to eat less of and things we need to eat more of. And one of the few things that we need to eat more of is vegetable oils, according to Harvard, Tufts, and every cardiologist out there. And I'm sure that they know that is absurd to say that, but they don't want to dig too deep behind the money train. They don't want to look a gravy train in the mouth. I think I'm probably mixing a metaphor there, but
Exactly. I would not be surprised if some of their research is funded by Canola Oil Association and some groups like that. And that's kind of the insidiousness of the Truman Show that we're living in, known as Nutrition in America. Is there's so many like special interest groups between the pharmaceutical companies and the food companies that keep us stuck in this. And of course, the Dietary Guidelines are coming out this year for 2020 through 2025. They just released their last draft. No mention in there about vegetable oils, good or bad. Just keep saturated fat below 10% of your total calories.
How are you supposed to do that, right? How are you supposed to do that and have any fat and not be like hungry all the time and spiking your insulin every minute?
Oh, they know that, Kate.
Right.
They know if you cut fat down, you're going to have to replace it with other sources of fat. That's where the PUFAs come in. And you're going to be starving, so you've got nowhere else to eat. You can only eat just so much protein. You're going to eat, by default, more carbohydrate. They are not stupid in the manipulation of all of this. Tell people fat's the worst boogeyman. It's worse than COVID-19 if you eat saturated fat.
Right.
Avoid it like the plague. And then meanwhile, the unintended consequence of that is more PUFA consumption, more carbohydrate consumption.
We grow PUFAs in this country. The only source of saturated and monounsaturated fat that's giant enough to feed all of us are animal fats, right? But that is much, much more of an expensive. Tallow and so on are much more expensive, and we have to continue on with this mythology that was created in the 70s that beef is unhealthy. Because if we started looking at that, we would start looking at how do we feed these, and we'd have to reconstruct all of industry, all of agribusiness, all of farming, all of medicine, because people would be so much healthier. And that's why the Truman Show. That's why, because they've created this little bubble of thought around nutrition that feeds the economy. And I think that message is it's a political message, but people love talking about politics. So we just have to get people started arguing about whether or not they're making us unhealthy on purpose. And we have to take over the conversation from the vegans who are saying, yeah, of course they are. They're telling us to eat meat. But actually, no, they're not. If you look at them, they never say, in fact, they say eat less red meat, especially processed.
And in the final draft of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines from the advisory committee, they said nothing about meat, which is like, okay, we don't say anything. We're going to tell you to just, what did we say the last time? And they go with that. And also they've created this perception that meat bad, vegetable, plant matter good. And so people by default in their heads just think meat is bad because they're not saying that it is at least neutral or good in people's diets.
Yes, exactly. I think maybe the shortest line to actually making people, well, I don't know, this is kind of perhaps a cynical view, but one of the best ways of waking people up to the reality of what it takes to be healthy is to have them, pay what it costs for their healthcare, right? Because then you're going to realize that if you have to pay cash for a doctor, you're going to see a doctor that gives you advice that makes you healthy, not a doctor that kicks you out in 5 minutes. You're going to be like, no, I want to get what I paid for. I want to pay you for an hour, whatever you think it takes to tell me what you think I need to do. Let's really talk. But right now they keep doctors so busy they don't get to talk, so you can't really understand the thought process or lack thereof that your doctor may have around nutrition.
And therein, that's also driven by economics and not by public health.
Yes, exactly. I mean, what doctor would want to change when they're making so much money off of sick people? That's why, I'm sure you probably had Dr. Nadir Ali on, the cardiologist in Texas. I mean, he's like a hero because he's one of these people that makes $1 bazillion a second putting stents in, which is a lot easier to do than sit down and talk with your patients. And he's decided to actually sit down and talk with his patients. I mean, that's incredible sacrifice there. So
did the same thing many years ago. And Dwight Lundell used to do heart surgeries, and he gave it up to tell people to cut their carbs and eat more fat. And so we've got a few brave ones out there, and you're certainly one of those brave ones as well. Cate, when I saw you had a new book, I'm like, well, about time, 12 years book. But man, so good to have you here today. Again, you guys, check her out. Her book, The Fatburn Fix. It's now available wherever books are sold, Amazon, all the rest. Nobody's going to stores, so go buy it online somewhere right now. And then Dr. Cate Shanahan on Instagram. Go follow her. Let's get her over 10,000. And once you're over 10,000, Cate, I'll show you what swipe up on stories means.
Yes, thank you, Jimmy.
Really? Thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's been so much fun talking to you.